Hello there, and welcome to Sync Music Matters, a podcast that explores the beautiful relationship between music and the moving image. My name is Jim Hustrip, and I'm your host on this journey, as each week I seek to understand the people and the process behind the best music in TV, film and games. I'm talking to composers, but I'm also talking to editors, music supervisors, directors, and anyone else who's involved with the synchronous process of pairing audio and visuals. Hello there, and welcome to Sing Music Matters. This week, I'm joined by Canadian composer Andrew Lockington, whose music you may well have heard on recent shows like Mayor of Kingstown, Lioness or Landman. They're all shows which were created and directed by Taylor Sheridan. We are going to delve into the score for Landman, have a chat about Andrew's creative process, and how a lot of the music was actually written before any footage had been shot. That being said, Andrew also tells a story about going on set and how a particular scene and performance from Billy Bob Thornton provided the creative inspiration for a particular cue. We also discuss the art of embracing imperfection, which I think in the dawning age of AI is very pertinent. But we also talk about how the emotion behind the music is maybe more important than the music itself. Sorry, AI. Not good news for you. Andrew also reveals why he thinks that only 50% of composing is actually about the music. Anyway, before we do, I have a quick ask, if I may. If you are a regular listener to the show, I would be incredibly grateful if you could take, 14 seconds to rate and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. It just helps this podcast to reach as many people as possible, and I would be very, very grateful. Anyway, enough of that. Grab yourself a curly whirly and a cup of tea. Let's talk to Andrew Lockington. Andrew Lockington is best known for his epic scores to the Warner Brothers blockbusters San Andreas, Rampage and Journey 2, The Mysterious Island, which together have surpassed over $1 billion in box office revenues. Recent and current credits include Netflix's epic sci-fi feature Atlas, starring Jennifer Lopez, and several projects with Taylor Sheridan, including Mayor of Kingstown, Lioness and Landman. Andrew is always looking to push the boundaries of film scoring, which has led him to recording in exotic locations like the jungles of Papua New Guinea, ancient temples in northern Japan, a volcano in Polynesia, and an abandoned subway station beneath central London. Andrew, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. So, I will start, as ever, with going back to a young Andrew Lockington growing up on the mean streets of Burlington. If someone had asked you what would you like to be when you grow up, what would you have replied? Well, I probably would have replied a pilot initially, and then an architect at one point, and ultimately a musician, probably a rock star would have been the way I characterized it. I guess what I do is nothing like that, but it's still music related. So I know early on I definitely gravitated to music. Before I even started piano lessons, I was sitting at the piano trying to play by ear different theme songs from TV or favorite songs from the radio. It was something I really loved to do. And very quickly, my parents put me and my sisters into piano lessons, and that satisfied a lot, but there was always an element outside of the classical music, outside of learning to sight read and play something someone else wrote, that there was an element to music that I really wanted to write it myself. I wanted to use it as almost a musical soliloquy and describe who I am, and it was very cathartic and an outlet, an emotional outlet, I guess almost like a diary of sorts. And I loved it. And ironically, even early on, I had this association between visuals and music, that I would look at something and play something. I remember my mother would move the piano to a different part of the room. I'd be looking out a different window, and I'd have different musical ideas based on the new perspective. So in that sense, I guess I trace back my love of scoring for film and television to that.
Can you remember any of the songs that you would try and pick out on the piano, any of the themes from TV that you'd heard?
I can. There was a TV show called Greatest American Hero,
okay.
Which Mike Post, who is famous for writing the music for Law & Order, wrote the music to.
Did he do the A-Team as well?
That's a good, probably. It sounds like him, but that's a good question. I don't know. He's done so many of the iconic themes that I grew up with. He was sort of the the TV John Williams, and John Williams was the film John Williams. But I was actually really lucky to get to spend some time with him this year and talk to him. And I think I was probably the 10,000th person to tell him that he had been a huge influence on me getting into the industry. But yeah, Greatest American Hero, I remember learning very early. Axel F. from Beverly Hills Cop.
Harold Faltermeyer.
That's right. I guess, it's interesting. A lot of film themes, TV themes. There was a Canadian pianist and composer named Andre Gagnon, who I loved and would learn to play his music as well.
Nice. It's great. It is powerful, isn't it? The imagery and the music that stays with us from a young age. Out of interest, you mentioned Pilot to begin with, and I think of my 30-plus guests, you are probably the third or fourth person to say Pilot. Maybe even 5 people have said Pilot. What was that inspiration?
Both of my grandfathers were in the Royal Canadian Air Force in World War II. I don't know if that's related at all, but very young, I loved the idea of flying, and maybe it's just moving in 3 dimensions. I don't know. There was something about it that I really liked.
It's nothing to do with Top Gun then.
No, but wow, what a great theme. It's interesting that movie comes out again, and no disrespect to Hans and the other composers on the score, but Harold's theme really stands out. It's amazing that you sometimes when I hear remakes of songs, I realize how great the song is when it can be reimagined, but the actual skeleton and the scaffolding and the bones of the song are so good that it can exist in different genres, different eras, different arrangements. So yeah, that's a great example.
Well, I obviously Top Gun Maverick I got to see at the cinema, which the original Top Gun I didn't. And obviously the opening sequences with the original piece of music with the tolling bell and the sort of the 808 hi-hat, and on a big screen with that sound system, it was just goosebumps, and I was like, wow, this is incredible. And yeah, as you say, you realise what an incredible piece of music it was. Okay, so at what point did noodling around on the piano turn into a serious inquiry into doing it professionally?
So I kind of went either the typical route. I'm not sure, but meeting other composers, I know a lot of us thought this way. We all wanted to be rock stars and wanted to be on stage playing and have girls screaming and people singing your songs along. So that definitely was an influence to me. And when I was 15, I joined a band it was an established band in Canada at the time. And they were all in their late 20s. And I was the 15-year-old keyboard player wearing my mother's blazer with shoulder pads and a bolero tie. And, we were right at the end of the new wave punk era, I guess. And yeah, I did that through high school. I was going to school and then getting on the tour bus and doing tours and trying to do both at the same time. And my parents were actually great about it, very supportive of it. I think they knew it was a calling of mine. And literally a few weeks before university applications were due, and I didn't really think I would apply to university, the band broke up and everyone went their separate ways. At the last minute, I applied for music composition and orchestration and also architecture, and ultimately chose music. And that's kind of how I came full circle back into the music composition, orchestral, music for visual media world.
So that feels like a sort of sliding door moment where it's choosing between architecture and music, because had you chosen architecture, we may not be sat here today having this conversation. You may not have scored the films that you've scored.
I think that's actually very true. I think there'd be a lot of buildings that would be condemned and dangerous for people to be in at the moment. But I think the world is safer because I chose music, for sure. Yeah, it definitely a sliding doors moment. I can think of several in my life that it's amazing. You wonder if inevitably you would have ended up in the same place, or if in fact it was a fork in the road and the other tangent had a dead end. I don't know.
Yeah, it could have been. I mean, I've met a lot of people in my life who studied architecture and then never ended up becoming architects. So it's quite possible, as you say, you might have followed that path and then come back to music somehow. So coming out of university, having studied music and orchestration, what was the path then from, presumably starting scoring short films to gradually getting to where you are today, sort of scoring Hollywood blockbusters and major TV series?
Yeah, so I spent 4 years at university. In my last year, in the springtime, I found out I wouldn't graduate. I wouldn't pass my master class, my technical piano performance. So I was encouraged to come back and do another year. It was a full year course. At the time, there was no remote. So, and I was ready to leave. So I left short that credit and moved to Toronto, which was the big city from near where I was from, and started writing music for jingles and ghostwriting things for people, usually ads and small things. And in that process, I spent maybe a year doing that and gradually realized, I really need to go to LA. I need to get in the car, drive to LA, and be one of the thousands, tens of thousands composers there trying to make it. But that was where films were happening in the style that I was trained in and wanted to do, and meaning orchestra and bigger budget things. That was sort of my dream and my calling. And I had met with several different composers who had all given me their suggestions on what to do. One of those was a composer named Michael Dana. And he was living in Toronto at the time, and his career had really started to take off. He'd worked on some big budget films. He'd teamed up with Ang Lee, the filmmaker who ultimately has won a few Oscars, I think, including for Life of Pi. But Michael phoned me literally days or the evening before I was leaving for LA, just to, on a whim, go, and said, I've got these 2 movies. I could use some help if you're interested in assisting me and being an assistant. And, starting out with him, I did everything from getting coffee to grocery shopping to stringing guitars to file management. I was willing to do anything to be a fly on that wall, because he was, and still is, an amazing composer. And to be in that room as things are getting created and learn the process and have a mentor who was literally doing what I hope to one day do was such a good opportunity. So I stayed in Toronto and did that for many years.
Can you remember any of the things that you learned from being that fly on the wall? Were there any aha moments that you still with you today?
Probably the biggest thing I learned was that writing music is sometimes half or less than half of our job. Actually collaborating and trying to write something you love that someone else feels is their vision, that the studio executives will also like, that the musicians can play, that, there are so many different filters that an idea has to go through. It's way more than, I just feel like doing this, there, it's done. And therefore, you have these relationships both on the film side, which is the producers and the director and the studio executives, but also your musicians who you have to have a relationship with, and they have to enjoy what they're doing in order to do their best work. They have to enjoy working with you. You sometimes have to learn what their strengths are so that you can write to their strengths and not put them in a position to play something they're not comfortable playing, because they can always hear that. So there were all these sides of it that I had no idea existed. I always thought someone gets a movie, they write the music, they hand it to the orchestra, it's done. But there's so much about relationships and collaboration and trying to understand someone else's creative vision and make sure you're not in a position where you have to choose one over the other, but in fact, it has to satisfy both. That was incredibly eye-opening and shocking and incredibly valuable for me to see that and how that works and how important relationships and communication are to what we do.
And at what point do you go from being the ghostwriter? Because obviously as a ghostwriter, you're not getting any credits. So what's that process from being the ghostwriter to then getting the credits to then eventually breaking away and becoming a composer in your own right?
Yeah, the ghostwriting was mostly before I met Michael, and I was able to work with and other people while I was working with him. So I was doing other projects at the same time. With Michael, it was really assisting. I did some conducting, I did some orchestration, and then very quickly, he was very generous in letting us co-compose some projects, putting both our names on something and actually working together, rolling up my sleeves with him. So that was huge because that gave me a credit on something that I could put on my resume, my CV, and I could send music out and say, I wrote this for this production that you can look up on IMDb, and it's a real thing. It exists and somebody watched it. So that was pretty early on, and he would do his films, which I would help him with, and then we would do some things together. And then I started doing things on my own in conjunction with that. So there was this second stream of me doing my own things, and gradually more and more of my time went to that. And to his credit, because he was really generous with this, he would encourage me, okay, go do your thing and come back in 6 weeks and help me. Or he would say, you can do your thing, just make sure it doesn't affect what we're doing, this project I'm doing. I couldn't have asked for a better situation. And I was very fortunate at that time as well. His brother, Jeff Dana, who's also a composer, needed an orchestrator. And I would go and work for Jeff and do films with him in LA, or we'd sometimes record in Seattle. And I was just building credits, orchestration credits, and co-composing credits, and then composing credits on my own. So it was kind of the best education I could have gotten, even though I didn't get a degree out of it. It really allowed me to test and witness the entire process and how different people do that. And to the point that I remember actually being at Abbey Road on my first big studio film. And I remember, I think it was the engineer turned to me and said, "Are you scared? Like, how do you feel? Like, this is a huge deal. There's a massive orchestra sitting out there. This is all on you." Maybe he was trying to make me scared. I'm not sure. But I remember thinking when he said that, I'm not scared. I've done this 30 times. I've been in the room. I've been through this process. It was just muscle memory at that point. So I'm incredibly grateful for that experience. And I think I got as much out of it as I contributed to it.
I mean, I was scared the first time I had a quartet playing something that I'd written, because there's that, it sounds great as I've programmed it and I've written it, but it's just, okay, when they play it, is it going to sound as it's meant to? Touch wood, so far it always has, but I was pretty scared. But as you say, you'd been through this process so many times that, on the 31st go, your confidence was there.
Well, there's always nerves. So I guess it's sort of a nervousness and a trepidation versus an insecurity.
Is there still now nerves?
Oh yeah, always. People have the nightmare of showing up at high school without wearing pants. Mine is Abbey Road, and I've forgotten to write the cues, and they're sitting there, and I have this nightmare several times a year where the orchestra's sitting there and there's no pages, and I think, oh no, I forgot to write that. And the studio and the director are sitting there, and I'm thinking, okay, can I make this up on the stand? Can I? And it's always a complete disaster. But hopefully, because I experienced that in my nightmares, it'll never happen in real life.
Yeah, there's those anxiety dreams, isn't it? I sometimes have them about exams or being in a musical and I've not rehearsed any of the cues and I don't know any of the music. All right, great. Well, I think that probably feels like a good segue to go under the skin and have a chat about some of your projects and start with Landman. Under the skin. So you mentioned, we were chatting off camera beforehand, that you were down in Texas with Taylor Sheridan. Presumably that was for Landman, was it?
It was. So I do 3 series with Taylor. He approached me a few years ago about a TV show called Mayor of Kingstown with Jeremy Renner. And that was our first time working together. And after a year of that, he hired me to do Lioness, which was with Nicole Kidman and Zoe Saldana and Morgan Freeman, among others. And that is shot in Texas. And then came along Landman the next year. So I currently do all 3 projects with him. And Landman is the only one of the 3 that is both shot in Texas and based in Texas.
What was it that led to you connecting with Taylor for Mayor of Kingstown?
So Taylor loves strings. I mean, he's actually incredibly knowledgeable and intelligent about music in general. So he doesn't love strings in the sense that that's the only thing he's entered into listening, but he's kind of explored the world and come back, and he loves string orchestra. And he had heard something I had done that was strings and responded to it. So that led to him calling me about Mayor of Kingstown and us starting to talk about it and collaborating.
Yeah, because you've obviously, this is the three series now that you've done with Taylor. At one point I was like, okay, so Andrew either only works with Taylor Sheridan or does movies that have got Dwayne Johnson in it, because you did the Rampage and San Andreas, didn't you? And
another one with Dwayne, that's true.
Oh, is it, Mr.
Journey 2.
Journey 2, yeah, that had it was about 3.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I mean, I'm interested generally in your creative process, but obviously specific relation to Landman. Where does that process begin? Where does that journey begin? And then what's your first? What are you doing first? How are you getting it under the skin of Landman?
So the amazing thing with Taylor, and this actually seems to be becoming more common than not in my process, is I'll get the script long before they shoot anything. And the amazing thing about TV now, series, I guess, it's funny, people stopped calling it TV series and they just call it series, I guess because it's something different than the episodic of 20 years ago. But the entire season is written as one story arc, whereas if you think back, so many shows were compartmentalized into 1 hour. And my understanding and in my experience on the early series stuff I did, the writers would write episode 1 with no idea what was happening in episode 5. But nowadays, the entire season is devised, and therefore, as a composer, you can think of it as almost like a 10-hour film instead of as 10 one-hour films. So with Taylor, I'll read it, I'll start writing ideas and coming up with really a sound for the world. What's the instrumentation? What is the music representing? Is it representing the character? Is it representing the backdrop? Is it representing the technology? What is it representing in the story? So Landman had the tremendous benefit that we had worked on 2 other projects and gone through this process. So we sort of could finish each other's sentences a little bit. And we had touched on a few ideas that hadn't been right for those projects, but some of them were right for Landman. So we got a bit of a running start. And my initial idea with Landman was, I'm going to go and record the sounds of one of the oil pump jacks that you see going up and down. And play it like a percussive instrument, record all the hums and the sound, and create those into sound textures or percussive sounds that I can manipulate and work into the score. And it actually worked out better than I thought. I got some really cool sounds and elements. But as we went, Taylor and I realized that the show isn't, as much as it's about the oil industry, it's really about people. It's really about Billy Bob's character and all the people that surround him, and family dynamics, and husband, wife, romantic love, teen love, parent, children, fractured families trying to figure out how to survive. And the music really needed to represent that, because the actual oil industry was very well represented already. I don't actually have any background in country music or in West Texas specifically, and the music of that world, but I kind of put together some instruments that sounded to me like that world. Not the world of West Texas, but sounded like the world he'd written and created for Landman. And interestingly enough, so many of them aren't what people think they are. So, like I use a Swedish medieval nyckelharpa. I use a cello and never fiddle. Like I'm always kind of using something one step removed from what people would expect, and it kind of just sounds like that world to me. And Taylor responded to it quickly and liked it. And I went down a lot of dead ends to kind of come up with the sound, but ultimately kind of came full circle back to I'm just going to close my eyes and press what I think it is. And it ended up being what fit the best with the show.
So a lot of that process of finding the soundscape is before you've even got any visuals to work with. You're literally just creating a soundscape which fits with the mood that you've picked up on in the script.
Completely. And that's very standard with how Taylor and I work together. I write ideas, bounce them off of him. He sends ideas back of how he thinks it could be changed or other things I can try. And so much of this happens before they even roll on camera. So, which is so backwards to how it normally works. But it's such an amazing way for the composer to be involved in baking the cake instead of just putting sprinkles on the icing on the cake, to actually influence how things work. And actually, in the case of Landman, and I've told this story a few times, but a couple weeks in, I went to set, and Billy Bob was shooting the opening scene of episode 1, really the cold open of the entire series. And I had been imagining what the music would do for that scene, but I hadn't really figured it out.
Is that the one where he's in a sort of metal container with a bag over his head?
Exactly. Yeah. And then he exits and he drives away and he's talking to himself in the cab of the truck. And I watched that scene, and as I watched it being filmed, I realized how musical Billy Bob's delivery was of his lines, and it sounded like a melody to me. And it was in a very specific key, and I could just hear the music that accompanied what he was saying. And I've had that happen before, but never to this degree. Like, it was just, I instantly heard him do it, and I thought, I know what the music is for this. And it was kind of written in my head on the spot. And that, we'd done all this pre-work, but that really cemented what the direction was going forward, and it influenced everything else.
So are you then got a voice note on your phone to try and capture that?
Yes, one that no one will ever hear but me, because it's horrifically hard to listen to.
Yeah.
And it's me yelling inversions and chord, and this tuning is this, and this string is down here, and it's the 4th fret, and it's, it's stuff that won't make sense to anybody else, but it does to me. Did
you have any instruments with you at the time or not?
I had a little keyboard that I carry with my laptop, just a little OP1 teenage engineering thing, but it was actually all just done voice. And really interestingly, with the Landman score, so many of the themes I devised with humming. Like I would hum into my voice memos and I would hum an element. And then I would play it for Taylor with my scat rough humming over it. And I'd say, I'll replace that, but what do you think of this melody? And he fell in love with the humming part.
Really? So that's you humming?
That's me, yeah. He loved that idea of just this. And we talked early on, actually, when we were originally devising the sound of what should the music sound like, we came up with this idea that it should sound like the conversations you have at 2 a.m. after a field bonfire party when you're a teenager. Those who are still awake in the middle of the night, sitting around visiting, and your buzz is dying down a little bit, and people have these incredibly honest, introspective, wow, look at the world and what's going to happen with us and who are we? And there's this honesty that comes out for some reason. Almost everybody I've said this to can relate to some point in their life where there's this moment where you just connect with a group of people, not in a romantic way, but just in a vibe way where maybe you're a little less guarded than normal. And you kind of talk and share things and talk about the world, and there's an honesty to it and a rawness to it that it isn't protected by that self-defense mechanism that guards so much of what we do in our everyday life. And we said, that's what the score should sound like. And I think Taylor kind of devised that's you'd be kind of humming. You'd be sitting with the guitar and talking and plucking away and humming, and you'd hear the finger noises on the fretboard. And when you play up an octave in the low strings, it would be slightly out of tune, but it's kind of cool that way. And, all these little imperfections that somehow communicate more emotion than the perfect version would. So we kind of leaned into that. And I have to say, I really credit him for that, because there were things that initially I would play on guitar and I'd say, I'll get a really good guitarist to play this. And he's like, that sounds real to me. That sounds like a real moment. Like that's very emotional. So he kind of encouraged me to embrace those imperfections.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Particularly in obviously the digital world where the tendency is to want everything. We can make everything very perfect, but actually the rawness to those recordings captured perfectly the atmosphere that you were trying to complement. It's an interesting thing because even I think Christabel Tapia de Veer was talking about this as well, in that quite often you'll capture a recording, sometimes even a voice note or on the phone, and then you'll go back to re-record it, but you never ever quite capture the essence that you were able to capture that first time. So it's just use it there because there was a spark, there was something magical happening in that moment that you can't then recreate.
I'm 100% believer in that. If I'm writing an idea, I make sure I record it that night, because I think about this. I say this often to vocalists when they're writing songs. When you write this, you're feeling it in that moment. And every other time you're reading it back. So if you can capture that you actually feel it, there's a difference there. There's something. So I had another really interesting moment with Taylor and this is dating back to Mayor of Kingstown, but I was writing some thematic ideas, having gone through the scripts, and I sent him maybe 4 or 5 little, I call them sketches, so little kind of 2-minute, 1 to 3 minute musical sequences, very simplified. And in this case, it was a piano theme. And I sent him 4 or 5, and I would say probably the 4th technically best one from a musical standpoint was one that I had just sat down. I'd heard that a friend from school when I was younger had passed away. And I was feeling a bit gutted by it. And, inevitably it kind of worked its way into, okay, I just played something that described how I was feeling. Now, so many people, I would play those 5 things. This would not be their favorite. But I sent it to Taylor, and he said, wow, I really love these. What is with number 4? What the hell? What's with that one? And it was interesting because it made me realize, and I'm going to describe this in a really strange way, but it made me wonder if music is actually a carrier wave for emotion. If it's not the notes, it's not mathematical, that there's something that can't be represented in ones and zeros, it gets kind of carried to the listener through that mechanism. And looking back, I realized that my entire career, my entire life with music is these points on a graph that were these magic moments where it was a take with the orchestra that, oh my God, what was that? Like this, just where everything, it might not have been technically perfect, but there was a spark there that you can't describe. And it took kind of this conversation with him getting back to me and going, what's with that one? Wow, that made me think I have to be on the lookout for those things and not worry about the conductor's page turn in the recording and not worry about these things. It also gave me hope that in this day and age when people are using AI to create songs, that I'm not sure that there's a mathematical equation that can replicate that. And the history that goes into that. Like for me, what he was picking up on the other side of that was, my 40-year relationship with somebody. Like every little aspect fed in something. And and all of that experience, those 40 years were curated into this emotional response that he somehow picked up on the other end. Anyway, it gave me tremendous hope, A, for the future of what we do, and B, it gave me a bit of insight into what to look for in what I write and what to value and what to touch and elaborate on and finesse and what to leave as a gem and say, this is special. I can't mess with this. So I wonder if that's what Cristobal was talking about, something similar.
And so to that end, do you think that our ability to create music that elicits an emotional response is directly proportional to our ability to access our own emotions?
That is a good question. I think that there's a lot that I can communicate in music that I don't think I can eloquently communicate or even tap into with words. So to the point that even sometimes I am conscious about something I'm feeling after listening to something I've written. So, when I write songs with lyrics, I will just put a vocal over top and I will scat any word that comes to my mind that has the right number of syllables to fit. It's very much, to a much lesser quality, but Paul McCartney yesterday originally being scrambled eggs. He said any word, right? And eventually he appropriately named it yesterday. But I do that as well. And sometimes I'll go back and listen to these random words that I've said and recognize that I was communicating something that I was actually feeling but hadn't really tapped into. But it was bypassing my conscious mind and just revealing itself in my subconscious. So anyway, this sounds like I'm way more Zen and yoga guru than I am, but it's interesting. I mean, thank God for those aspects of music, because I think that's what keeps us coming back and hoping to find those gold nuggets in things we do, because that's kind of what keeps you going, keeps you looking.
Yeah, absolutely. And as well, when you were talking about that conversation with Taylor about the 2 a.m. Buzz is wearing off and people are starting to, they're less guarded and they're having those conversations and being perhaps more vulnerable. I think there's also testament to be able to tap into that, because as you say, that there's a vulnerability in that. So to be able to tap into that emotion and communicate it musically, I think you have to be able to find that somewhere within yourself anyway. So I don't know, it got me thinking about whether or not composers or people who make music do have to have a heightened level of emotional awareness in order to communicate the emotion. But
well, I'll tell you what they do have to have is an experience, a life outside of music. Because I know that the more I sit and write, the less I have to write about. So I need to have a life outside that I can draw upon. And I've had moments where, my wife and I were in Australia, and this past year, I was doing meetings and we had a bit of time off, but I wasn't at my studio. I wasn't writing. And the entire time I was thinking, oh my gosh, I've got all this work to do that I'm getting behind. I'm going to get back and I'll have to make up these few weeks as fast as I can. By the time I got back, I just had a plethora of ideas and little nuggets and little things. My brain had been working on it the whole time. So, to the point that actually I think I was more productive having stepped away than I would have been if I'd been locked in. So I try to remember that now, that that so much of what's happening is happening outside the studio, outside of the outlet of actually putting something on tape or in our computer system. It's kind of manifesting itself, and the hatching is all that happens in the studio.
Yeah. So when you're looking to top up the creative well, what do you do?
Well, I have 3 daughters who keep me busy. My wife and I have 3 daughters, and I spend time with them. We have a cabin up in the woods, which Da Vinci, the golden retriever we were talking about earlier, he and I will go up sometimes and I'll write for a week and kind of go back and forth between writing and hiking or paddleboarding. I love to paddleboard and just get out. What I don't love to do, sadly, anymore is really listen to a lot of music. I find I'm so inundated that if I'm in the car, I'm listening to a podcast or doing the phone, calling friends I haven't talked to. But I find as much as I love music, I find I've got my own melodies and chord progressions running around in my head, and sometimes hearing something else can taint that and confuse it. So I'm often trying to sequester my brain away from that.
Yeah, makes absolute sense. But it sounds like nature is quite a source of inspiration for you then, if you're talking hiking, stand-up paddle.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I think it was right before COVID that we came upon this. It had been vacant for 4 years, this cabin, literally a log cabin up north. And it was actually a really good event to happen in our timeline, because it sort of forced us to have other projects and get out in nature and be off the grid and be away from the city. We live, Toronto's a pretty big city. It's one of the biggest in North America. It's, very metropolitan. I remember showing a video. I was showing a traffic cam to Andrew Dudman, my engineer at Abbey Road, and the traffic cam showed the highway, and he said that highway is 16 lanes. Like, it's 8 in each direction at this point. He's like, does that exist? Like, and it's funny, he's talking from London, but then you go to London and, even I don't know what it is, the A5 or what is the highway?
M1, the M25, yeah.
Okay, so they're 2 lanes each way usually, right? Sometimes
3, but yeah, that's about it. Well, I suppose that's one thing you're not short of in Canada, is it? Space.
We're not short of space, but as a country, so much of our population is concentrated in these very concentrated areas. So just to get outside the city, we have bears and deer and moose and wolves, and there's animals all over the place. So it's kind of nice to get out and unplug as much as you can, and to take a bit of a breath.
So were any of the musical ideas for Landman hatched in this cabin?
Many of them. Yeah. Landman, especially. So much of it was written there, sitting on a dock at the lake with a guitar. Yeah. And, my voice memos, I recently, changed phone plans, and, my phone is, most people their phones are full of photos. Mine are full of voice memos. So I have to figure out how to get through them. And it's interesting. I don't know if you find this being a composer yourself, but if often the act of recording it and knowing it's safe, you can take a breath and you might not access it again, but just there's a comfort that happens in knowing it was archived.
Yes. So just you've captured the moment, you've got that snapshot, and you may never come back to it, but you have it if you need it.
Yeah, exactly.
I did actually have a question, and this is sort of nerding out a little bit on the audio side, I think, because it's interesting you brought up the humming, because I was very conscious of that, and I thought it worked perfectly for Landman. And there was one track, what is it? Is it Death Rattle? Where you've got this sort of very close mic'd hum, but then it just expands into this big space behind. And my question was, can you remember the processing that's going on there? Because it sounds fantastic.
Thank you. I can. So Taylor and I had talked about using harmonica on the score, and I was pushing back on it because it was a little more up the middle than I had kind of approached the other elements. So I said to him, what do you think of me using the harmonica through a microphone and through an amp? And then we'll dirty it up and saturate it. And he said, great idea. So I got into the studio there's a music programmer, musical genius I work with, he plays trumpet. His name is Michael White, and he's a programmer of early 70s modular synth stuff. And we've worked together on many things, and he's created a lot of sounds for me that I've worked with. And I was over at his place, and we were going to record this harmonica through the mic. And as we were sort of doing check, trying to get a sound, we both went, whoa, that's cool. Like the voice. So into this mic that wasn't meant to be a vocal mic, I just started humming into it. And I had my manuscript of some of the themes and just started humming into this. And we had a couple of delays on it. We were feeding both the direct and the amped signal back into this delay. And it just kind of happened. And and I remember playing it for Taylor, and I said, I have no idea what this is, where it goes. Like, this is just an idea. And he said, oh my God, this is the death rattle. This is the sound when the Grim Reaper is coming for them. And anyway, ironically, you bring it up because on Sunday we're working on season 2 right now. Yeah. And I was trying to recreate that. And I remember at the moment saying to Michael, okay, we have to take a photo. We have to look at every setting and match it. And as you know, with analog gear, you can set everything exactly the same, but you never know if you get it back, right? So we got close, and we got something I like just as much that's slightly different. But it's amazing that when we finally dialed it in on Sunday, it was Sunday morning, when we finally dialed it in, I was like, I'm going to sing till my voice is raw, because we've got to capture everything we can, because we never know if we're going to get this back again. So, well,
that's nice. It's fitting that it's a similar sound, but it's evolved somewhat for season 2. So that's quite fitting. Yeah, it's those happy accidents are wonderful, aren't they? So with the modular synth stuff, because there's quite a lot of probably more synth heavy when you listen to the score of Lioness. Is that similar, the sort of modular synths that we hear in the score for Lioness?
Yeah, so some of those are stuff I've done with Michael White. I have some other programmers I work with as well. And then one of the things at the cabin I have is all these different guitar pedals that I throw. It's funny, one of the disadvantages of being there is I don't have the same, it's a very small setup. But what I love about it, and so much of the time I have this little portable Sound Devices recorder that I go out into the field, and you mentioned Papua New Guinea. I take all over with me with the little pair of Shep's mics. But one of the things I'll do with the pedals is I'll record into the sound devices, and I'll just record for an hour and just mess around and play with things. And one of the things I've discovered in that is how since the advent of Pro Tools, which is really my whole life in this industry, but looking at sound waves as you're hearing them has become such a common thing to visualize something and to actually go back to recording into a box where you can see a meter, but you're not seeing a waveform was incredible. I found myself focusing on my ears and not my eyes, and closing my eyes and just listening instead of watching. So it ended up being, the disadvantage ended up being a huge advantage.
I suppose that's the superpower effect, isn't it? When you're robbed of one sense, the others become heightened. And yeah, I think even with mixing, when you look at a mixing, it's very used to looking at an EQ analyzer and looking at the audio, but actually everything you're doing, I think obviously it is auditory led, but because we have a visual accompaniment, does that rob us then of a certain extent of, a few percentage of what we could be hearing otherwise if we weren't being distracted by visuals? And I suppose that also to the end of when you're talking about quite a lot of the music is written before you have any visuals. So you're then tapping into the emotion, and then the emotion is then matched to picture rather than, because I think sometimes when I've worked a picture, I can become overly focused on the picture. So for Landman, having written a lot of these tracks before filming, were those tracks then used as temp score?
So they were. It is really interesting because it doesn't alleviate the act of looking at visuals and having to score the scene.
No.
Because that still happens.
Sure.
But what essentially it is that the building blocks, the theme is sort of roughed into place. I think of it like a painter. They're using their 2-inch paintbrush to kind of go, it's kind of this, or it's kind of this. And then you have to go back and actually make it look like a face or make it look like, a person. So, but yes, one of the amazing things about Taylor, and actually there's a few filmmakers now that I work with in this way. I don't think it always works properly. Like I've worked on films where it was a mistake to try to do this, but with Taylor, they're just temping with my stuff and my stuff that I've written for that show. So we'll go through and we'll say, this is this theme, this is the family theme, this is the danger theme or the shark theme or the nemesis. We have better names than that, but essentially, and then it gets roughed in, and then I see it and I go, okay, this is how we tailor it to this scene. This is where we pause. This is where we kind of go around the dialogue, or quite often it'll be the right theme, but it'll shift. It'll sort of have its eureka moment in a climax in the wrong place. So you're trying to kind of figure it out. And sometimes there's nothing that works. Like a lot of the process is, Chad Galster, who's Taylor's sort of lead editor, will send me a scene and say, okay, I've tried a few things, but nothing's right. Can I send you this 4 minutes and see what you think? And I'll write something that day, send it back to him. And he's really good with music, and he'll have really good input and say more like this or more like that. But it's kind of getting figured out early. I've done some big films where I've written some ideas early, and they get temped in. And one of the big differences between film and TV is a film can be in post-production for a year or a year and a half. So you write something, people listen to it 5 times a day, every day for a year and a half. At the end of the year and a half, well, what if we try something different here? And I totally get it because, I can't listen to the same piece of music that long either. But you can sometimes have something really good that people just got so used to it that they were sort of longing for a change. So yeah, it doesn't always work well on the long format film stuff, but with Taylor, it works really well, especially with how quickly we're turning these things out. So it's not like we're at a time crunch where you have a week to replace the temp and everyone's got temp love. In this case, if they have temp love, it's your temp. So it's great.
That example where you say the editor's coming to you and sending you 4 minutes of film and saying, can't find anything that's quite working for this, and you're doing an idea in a day, how rough and ready is that? Is that fairly polished by the end of the day, or is it just sort of, again, sort of you're sending something over and go, it will look like this, but how does this feel?
It's either finished or very close.
Okay.
So one of the things I do with Landman is before the season starts filming, I've written the themes, I've recorded what I call sketches and send them to Taylor and the team. And then I go to Abbey Road, actually. I have a lot of recording there. My main engineer is there. I have a good relationship with the RPO, Royal Philharmonic. And we'll go there for the better part of a week and record these snippets of theme ideas in orchestra. And they're never, very rarely are they the entire cue. They're the orchestral line. I'll have them play the chord progression. I'll have them play a melody, a B melody. I'll sometimes do it in different keys. I'll kind of create these building blocks that I can then bring back and build a cue around or insert into a cue that I'm working on. So with the exception of that, whether that's happened or not happened at the point, the cue is usually done. And it's most of the instruments are me. I have a couple of solo instruments that I'll have people come in every couple of weeks and say, okay, here, I'm going to hum something to you, you play it back. The humming thing, is not only ends up on the score, it's part of the process.
I was going to say, there's a real humming theme, isn't there?
I know. Can you hear the rasp in my voice? I'm a victim of my Landman score here.
So you play, because there's quite a bit of guitar in the Landman score, you play guitar as well. Are you playing the nickel harper, or have you got a nickel harpist?
I'm playing the nickel harpa.
Wow.
You see, the reason it works is I'm so bad at playing nickel harpa that you get all of these little overtones and little squeaks and little bits of humanity that I have to make sure I don't improve at all, because that's kind of the sound.
Yeah, you don't want it too polished, do you? That's really interesting. Yeah, because I did a horror short a few years back and decided that nickel harper, because you can get some incredible sounds out of a nickel harper, some horrible screechy things and then some beautiful. So yeah, it's a very versatile instrument. And then I suppose as well, it's maybe I didn't actually play it myself, but it's presumably easier to play than a violin from a bowing, but also because it's got keys rather than your actually fretless fretboard.
It's easier in the sense of where you put your finger. It's actually harder because the string is being pressed down by a wooden key. So whereas your finger's dampening any unwanted vibration when you're pressing on the fretboard, the wooden key, if you imagine taking a drumstick and pressing it on a guitar, on a fretless guitar, you have to be just the right pressure for it to not be, if it's too strong, you get a vibration. If it's not strong enough, it doesn't create the node in the string. So thankfully, I haven't mastered that part yet, because it's helped my career.
It's very much part of your sound.
It is, yes.
Getting a taste. It's interesting that you say now you don't listen to music, and I completely understand that. I'm very much the same. I think by the end of the day, I'm so saturated with music that I need space away. But what is some of the music that, in your more formative years has influenced you? That could be bands, it could be film scores. Are there any particular artists, bands, albums that you look back on and think that was seminal in terms of your musical education?
So not listening to much music is no reflect. I mean, I think there's a tremendous amount of amazing music out there in all genres. I love music of all genres, not just film music, pop, everything, jazz. I can appreciate so much. I think more than particular artists, there are always certain tracks that really resonated with me. I mean, some of them are more typical. Both sides now. Joni Mitchell, the orchestral version from Love Actually, I think is probably so many people's favorite track, but I just love it. I feel like it's one of those close your eyes and everyone went into a trance and something magical came out kind of thing. I grew up really loving John Williams. So that one of the scores I really like of his is Catch Me If You Can. I think it's really clever and outside of the box for him. I love Tom Newman's Road to Perdition score. I think is just also emotionally intangible. Like you can't figure out what it is that makes it so moving, but there's something really moving about it. I don't know. It's funny. I heard something this morning on a trailer. There was a song that really moved me, and I don't know. I guess I just have these little moments where I grasp onto things. But I mean, I'm not sure about other industries, but it's anyone working in music. You have to have something. You have to have a talent to be doing music for a living and for people to respond to it. I don't think there are posers or people that are untalented who have fooled everybody. It's not one of those things you can really fool people with. So, and the other thing I'll say is I've learned through everything we've talked about to appreciate the imperfections and how some of those imperfections can be beautiful. And when you go back and listen to the Beatles, now we've heard the Beatles so many times that we've come to assume it was all musically perfect. It's not. It's not at all. And if the Beatles had auto-tune, we would have missed out on so much greatness. So, or even click tracks, if they'd had all of these things. So I think, I guess my ear is listening for those imperfections now, trying to catch those little magic moments that might otherwise get lost.
And you touched on it briefly earlier. You mentioned that provides a ray of hope in a world where AI is looming. But yeah, so I think the same way that those imperfections is what we love, is what we crave, it's what we need. It's where performance is, it's where groove is. It's and people, that's what people respond to. So hopefully we'll go back to more of that imperfection of what makes something raw in a moment.
Yeah, I think when I read a book, I feel like I'm getting inside the head of the author, and I'm starting to think, what are the other experiences of this author, and it's like a window into into a curated version of their life. And I haven't quite wrapped my head around how a digital imitation of that is able to compete. I think it can be something and be very appreciated. I'm not saying that there's no value to it at all, but for me, I'm really curious about the human connection, and in order for that to happen, there has to be a human on both ends of the line.
Right then, well, I think it's time to wrap things up with the quick fire questions. This is the deep stuff. What's your favorite cookie?
My favorite cookie is chocolate chip.
Chocolate chip. It's a classic. Are you a dunker?
I am not a dunker, no.
What do you do to let off steam?
Recently I've taken up pickleball. I'm sad to say. We need to rename it murder ball or something a little more, that I can hold my head a little higher, but not after a vinegared cucumber. But anyways, I do that. My wife and I do that. It's a lot of fun. And I love paddleboarding. Haven't done it in years, but I grew up sailing. So I love being on the water. Pickleball
seems to be taking off over here as well. Paddle, or padel, not sure how you say it, and pickleball both seem to be growing in popularity.
It's sort of like, I think of it like I played tennis when I was younger, so I don't think of it as tennis. I think of it as large-scale ping pong. But
giant ping pong.
It's fun.
What's a little known fact about Andrew Lockington?
I actually love to woodwork.
Oh.
I love to make furniture out of wood. I don't do it as much anymore, and I still have all 10 fingers, which is a good thing. But yeah, no, I love building things.
So do you have furniture in your home which you've made?
I do, yeah.
Oh, incredible.
Yeah.
What a skill to be able to make your own furniture.
You shouldn't sit on it, but I have it.
It looks great, but don't sit on it.
Exactly.
What scares you?
Well, I have daughters who are coming of age, growing to adults. So I heard somebody say that they were the last generation to grow up without a cell phone. And I think that's interesting. I think there's a part of I grew up, I'm not sure what generation you're in, but I grew up at a time when I didn't have a cell phone. My parents didn't know where I was. If you wanted to go and see a friend, you would ring their doorbell and ask if they were there. Their parents usually didn't know where they were. And if you needed to get them a message, it might be tomorrow before they heard.
Yeah.
So I'm a bit saddened that, but I guess the future scares me as to where we're going and what future generations will go through. That said, I had grandparents who didn't have running water and grew up on a farmhouse with 10 kids and didn't have a phone, didn't have a telegram, and the world continued to be okay. So I tell myself we'll be fine.
Yeah. I think every generation has that, doesn't it, where they fear for what the future generations are going to have to endure, but they've never known it any different, so they find a way. And finally, what piece of advice would you give to your younger self?
I think I spent a number of years trying to sound like I thought the sound was of Hollywood, the sound of film scores was. And I would tell my younger self to lean into what comes naturally. And the more authentic I can be, the more people will respond to it.
Yeah.
Because it's almost when I stopped caring what people thought that I think people started to relate to what I was doing.
Yeah, I think that's very sound advice. I was watching, who was it? What's his name? The producer of Red Hot Chili Peppers. He written a book on creativity. Rick Rubin.
Oh, okay.
Rick Rubin. Saw something recently about Rick Rubin saying exactly the same thing about not making music for other people. Make it for yourself. Make it what sounds authentic, because that's what will resonate with people.
Well, I think a lot of I have composers come to me today and say they don't know anything about orchestra. They only know how to do this, but they write music. And I tell them that some of my best music is written on things I don't know anything about. So lean into your weaknesses and use it as a strength.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for taking time to chat. It's been insightful and enlightening, and I'm very grateful. Where can people find you if they want to check? Obviously Spotify, there's plenty of scores up there, but social and what have you? Social,
I'm only on Instagram. So Andrew Lockington Music on Instagram. There are a number of people on Twitter who say they're me, they're not. So avoid those.
Andrew, thanks very much for taking the time to chat.
Amazing. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, and given that you've listened this far, I feel you might have, then I would be honoured and incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to subscribe, rate and review on your podcast platform of choice. By subscribing, you'll automatically be notified each time a new episode drops, and by rating the show, you tell the artificial intelligence that will soon be running the world that this podcast is worth listening to. I certainly get a lot of insights and value from these conversations, and I genuinely hope you do too. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, then you can email me, podcast@larpmusic.com. Larpmusic.com is my digital abode, and the home of the podcast is larpmusic.com/Sync Music Matters Podcast. And Sync Music Matters Podcast is hyphenated. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.